It was 4 long years ago, when a mother's world was torn apart in an instant. Her daughter mysteriously disappeared from a restroom inside a popular children's center located at a bustling Miami mall. There were no clear signs of what had happened, just silence, confusion, and a tidal wave of heartbreak. Posters went up everywhere, authorities searched tirelessly, and every conceivable lead was pursued, night after sleepless night. But Isabel was simply gone. Still, fate has a strange way of rewriting even the darkest chapters. On an otherwise ordinary afternoon, that same grieving mother happened upon a secluded wedding on a quiet beach. What she saw in that moment stopped her in her tracks. Something so chilling, it nearly brought her to her knees. Before we dive deeper into this harrowing story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if this video resonates with you, please take a moment to subscribe. Angela Harrow stepped inside South Key Mall under the soft golden hues of the late afternoon sun. At 45, she bore the unmistakable look of someone who had spent the past 4 years carrying the unbearable weight of unanswered questions. Every wrinkle on her face was a silent testimony to restless nights and moments filled with despair. Yet today, she was back, returning not as a shopper, but as a mother on a mission. The familiar hum of the mall greeted her ears, the mix of laughter, chatter, and distant music echoing the life that continued around her, while hers had come to a painful pause. She walked with purpose, carrying a stack of freshly printed posters bearing her daughter Isabel's face. The child's smile, once full of life and curiosity, was now a haunting image she couldn't escape. As Angela moved from pillar to pillar, she peeled away the worn, sun-faded posters and replaced them with the new ones. Her fingers moved mechanically, but her thoughts drifted back to the moment everything changed. She could still see it clearly. Isabel's excited blue eyes sparkling with anticipation as she clung to Angela's sleeve. "Please, Mommy, I promise I'll be good, just let me come shopping with you," the little girl had pleaded. Angela, bone-tired from another grueling shift at the small food vendor stall she managed, had gently declined. "Not today, sweetheart. Mommy's got errands to run. How about you play at Little Explorers for a bit? I'll grab you a big scoop of your favorite ice cream afterward?" That last smile from Isabel, the faintest hint of disappointment masked by trust, was forever seared into Angela's memory. She would give anything to rewrite that one decision. She remembered watching her daughter skip off toward the childcare center, never glancing back. There had been no warning, no ominous sign, just a normal day turned into a mother's worst nightmare. Angela approached the glowing digital displays lining the mall's walkways. Each screen now displayed Isabel's missing person alert, a gesture introduced by mall management in a long overdue attempt to show remorse for their lapse in security. For Angela, those screens were both a source of comfort and torment. They reminded her that the world still remembered her child, but they also underscored that Isabel remained lost and time was slipping through her fingers. The cacophony of the mall began to fade in her ears as her mind replayed that fateful afternoon. The blaring fire alarm, the stampede of confused shoppers, and the gut-wrenching realization that Isabel had vanished. Angela had frantically searched every corner, screaming her daughter's name, her voice cracking with fear. Later, security footage revealed a shadowy figure, someone who slipped into the restroom and walked out carrying something bundled in a jacket. That something was Isabel. She reached the entrance of Little Explorers. The place looked different now. The cheerful murals had been repainted, security systems upgraded, and the entire management replaced. But to Angela, the essence of the building was unchanged. It was still the place where she had last seen her daughter. 2 uniformed guards now stood watch at the door, a visible reminder of past failures. Angela gave them a small nod, acknowledging their presence and shared sorrow. They, too, had been there that day. Her hands trembled as she pressed the final poster against the glass. Stepping back, she studied the collage of images, each one capturing a different side of Isabel. Her playful grin, her love for sunflowers, her missing front tooth during kindergarten. Angela's heart clenched. 4 years had passed. She wondered if her daughter's face had changed, if she would even recognize her own child anymore. The mall buzzed around her with vibrant energy. Parents with strollers, teens laughing over coffee, couples enjoying a date night. Life carried on. But Angela remained emotionally anchored to that singular moment of loss. Her life had split into two parts, before Isabel disappeared and everything that came after. She let out a shaky breath. Another evening loomed, and like every night before, she would return to an empty home filled with traces of a life that once was. Isabel's bedroom remained untouched, as if frozen in time. Yet every morning, Angela would rise and resume her search. Because deep down, she clung to hope, the belief that somewhere out there, her daughter was still alive. A gentle touch on her shoulder brought her back to the present. She turned and found herself face to face with Linda Kosher, the new owner of Little Explorers. With eyes full of empathy, Linda pulled Angela into a soft embrace. "I thought I might find you here today," Linda said, her voice warm and steady. Angela leaned into the hug, grateful for the support. Over the years, Linda had become more than a professional acquaintance. She had been a pillar of strength, a woman who had taken charge of the child care center with fierce determination, transforming it into a fortress of safety. Her unwavering support for Angela had forged a unique bond between them. "Thank you," Angela whispered, her voice barely audible, "for letting me post the flyers, for everything." Linda's eyes glistened. "You never need to thank me, Angela. It's the least I can do." Angela's gaze drifted once again to the poster, her breath caught in her throat. "How are you holding up?" Linda asked gently. Angela took a moment to respond, her voice laced with exhaustion. "As well as can be expected. Some days are easier, but others, it's like it just happened yesterday." "It's been 4 years already," Angela whispered, her voice barely carrying over the noise of the bustling mall. Linda nodded solemnly, her eyes clouded with empathy. "I can't even begin to imagine the pain you've endured all this time," she said softly. "Has there been any progress? Any new leads at all?" Angela's heart tightened. She shook her head slowly, the weight of despair settling on her shoulders once again. "Nothing," she murmured. "It's as if she simply vanished into thin air. No evidence, no sightings, nothing concrete. The detectives tell me that with every year that passes, the odds grow slimmer." Her voice trailed off, unable to complete the thought aloud. Linda reached over and gently squeezed Angela's hand. "Don't lose hope, Angela. Miracles happen. Children have come home after years. We haven't given up on Isabel, and we never will. You're not alone in this." Angela gave a faint smile, appreciating Linda's unwavering support. "I know, it's just the not knowing. It's unbearable. I lie awake wondering, is she safe? Is she scared? Is she still alive?" The last words caught in her throat, too terrible to say. Linda guided her gently toward a nearby bench. "You can't torture yourself like this," she said, her voice filled with compassion. "You've done everything any mother could do and more. You've carried a weight that no one should ever have to bear. But you must understand, none of this is your fault." Angela's eyes brimmed with tears. "But what if it is? What if it all comes back to that one moment? If I had just taken her with me instead of dropping her off at the center? If I hadn't been so tired or short-tempered? If I had listened to her, just that once?" "No," Linda said firmly, her tone cutting through Angela's guilt. "You were doing what any mother would do. Balancing work and parenthood isn't easy. We all make decisions like that every day. The only ones to blame are the people who took her, not you." Angela nodded slowly, though the guilt continued to gnaw at her from the inside. "I used to complain about being a single mom, the exhaustion, the constant struggle to make ends meet, and trying to be everywhere at once. And now, I'd trade anything to have those hectic, stressful days back." Linda listened quietly, letting Angela's pain spill out like a long-held breath. "Every morning I wake up and pretend I have a purpose," Angela continued, her voice just above a whisper. "I come here, open the shop, hang the posters, then I go home. And it's just me. It's like I'm on autopilot, moving through a life that doesn't feel like mine anymore." "You're not living for nothing," Linda said, her own eyes now glistening with tears. "You're living for Isabel, Every step you take, every poster you hang, every conversation you have, it's all for her. That's courage, Angela. That's what love looks like. Angela wiped at her eyes quickly, a wave of vulnerability washing over her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to unload all this on you. You've got your own life, your own things to worry about. Never apologize for speaking your truth, Linda said with conviction. You're not a burden. That's what friends are for. In fact, I've been meaning to mention something. I run a support group for parents who've been through similar situations. It's a space where people can talk openly without judgment. Maybe you'd find comfort there. Angela hesitated, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. I remember you mentioned it once, last year, I think. I didn't think I was ready then, but maybe now I am. When do you meet? Every Friday night at 7 p.m., right here in one of the South Key meeting rooms, Linda replied. There's never any pressure. Come when you feel ready. Sometimes, just being in a room with people who truly understand your pain can be incredibly healing. Angela looked down at her watch and blinked in surprise. Is it that late already? Linda followed her gaze and glanced up at the nearby wall clock. Her eyes widened as the glowing red numbers confirmed the time. Oh, my God, she gasped, pressing a hand to her forehead. I can't believe this. I invited you to the group, but I completely forgot. I have a flight to Puerto Rico tonight. I'm so sorry, Angela. Angela's eyebrows rose slightly, though she quickly masked her disappointment. So, you won't be at the group tonight? She asked, already knowing the answer. I won't, Linda admitted, her expression deeply apologetic, but I'll be back next week. Please don't let this stop you from going. The others would welcome you with open arms. Angela forced a small smile, though her shoulders sagged under the weight of her feelings. It's okay. Have a great trip. She turned to leave, gripping her bag a little tighter than usual, but just as she reached the door, Linda called out, Wait. Actually, I've got a better idea. Angela turned, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. A glimmer of curiosity replaced the disappointment in her expression. I'm only going for the weekend, Linda explained, her eyes suddenly bright with excitement. What if you came with me? Angela blinked. Go with you? I mean it, Linda said, stepping closer. You need a break, Angela. You deserve one. When was the last time you took a vacation? Even just a couple of days away might help clear your mind and lift your spirit. Angela stood frozen, torn between her deeply ingrained routine and the allure of a temporary escape. I don't know. It's so last minute. That's exactly why you should come, Linda said with a grin. No time to overthink or second guess. The flight's at 8:00 p.m. We could be on a warm beach by sunrise. Think about it. Angela glanced back at the nearest poster of Isabel, her sweet smile, her tiny face. Maybe, just maybe, a change of scenery would offer a new perspective. Maybe she would return with renewed strength to continue the fight. All right, she said, surprising herself. I'll do it. Lyndon beamed, wrapping Angela in a quick but enthusiastic hug. Wonderful. I'll see you at the airport in an hour. Just pack light. We'll only be gone for the weekend, Linda had said with a bright smile as she hurried off to finalize the travel arrangements. Angela stood there motionless for a few moments, her mind reeling from the spontaneity of her own decision. It wasn't like her to act on impulse, not anymore. The past 4 years had instilled caution in her, a need for control amidst chaos, but this time something inside her had whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time for a brief departure from the pain. Still caught between disbelief and the stirrings of something close to hope, Angela made her way to her small food vendor's stall. The comforting aroma of grilled meats and seasoned rice hung in the air, a familiar scent she'd grown used to over the years of tireless work. Behind the counter, her trusted employee Luca was managing the busy lunch rush with his usual efficiency, calling out orders and handing over plates with effortless rhythm. "Luca," she said, flagging him down with a gentle wave. He stepped away from the counter and joined her near the prep area. "Hey, Angela, everything okay?" She nodded, though her expression betrayed a whirlwind of emotion. "I need a favor. I'm going away for the weekend. Can you close up tonight and send me the daily sales report?" Luca's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but it took only a second for his expression to soften into one of encouragement. "Of course. Don't even worry about it. It's about time you took a break. You've earned it. Angela smiled, a genuine one this time. Luca had been her rock throughout the years, keeping the business running when she couldn't muster the energy to care. Without his dependability and quiet strength, she might have closed the stall long ago. As she exited the mall and headed home to pack, her emotions swirled in a storm of guilt and anticipation. Leaving Miami, even for just a couple of days, felt like abandoning the search. Every minute away felt like a missed opportunity. But beneath that guilt was a flicker of something lighter, an ember of hope. Maybe this brief escape would offer clarity. Maybe it would help her find the resolve to keep going. At home, she tossed a few essentials into her smallest suitcase. Toothbrush, a couple of dresses, sandals, and sunscreen. She paused at her nightstand, her eyes lingering on the framed photo of Isabel, the same one she'd kept by her bedside since the day she disappeared. She ran her fingers gently over the glass, her heart squeezing with longing. "I'll never stop looking for you," she whispered, "but maybe this will help me come back stronger." With that quiet promise, she zipped up her suitcase, locked her front door, and called a cab. As she sat in the back seat and watched the familiar streets of Miami roll by, she allowed herself, just this once, to look forward to something. For the first time in years, the ache in her chest gave way to a cautious sense of possibility. The airport was a hive of movement and sound, a cacophony of rolling suitcases, intercom announcements, and boarding calls. Angela met Linda at the check-in counter, her suitcase in hand. Linda, already energized, chatted excitedly about the trip. "Her destination is a private beachside villa," she said, handing over Angela's ticket. "It's gorgeous, you'll love it. And don't even think about paying me back, this is my treat." Angela tried to protest, but Linda wouldn't hear of it. "It's a gift," she said firmly. "Let someone do something nice for you." The flight to Puerto Rico lasted just under 3 hours, landing shortly before midnight. As they stepped out into the warm, humid air, the scent of salt and tropical flowers greeted them. A taxi whisked them through winding roads lined with dense foliage and glimpses of moonlit ocean waves. Angela sat quietly, taking it all in. When they arrived at the villa, Angela's breath caught in her throat. It was a sprawling, single-story home with wide windows and an open layout glowing softly under the stars. Inside, the decor blended elegance and coastal charm, rich woods, airy curtains, and soft hues of coral and seafoam. Linda explained that the villa belonged to her best friend and business partner, who had always insisted she use it whenever she needed an escape. "You'll take the master bedroom," Linda said as she handed over a set of keys. "You deserve the best view." Angela entered the master's suite and stood still, gazing at the ocean through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It felt unreal. Just hours ago, she had been replacing missing person posters. Now she was wrapped in luxury, surrounded by peace. Changing into her sleepwear, she climbed into bed. But as with every night before, sleep didn't come easily. She reached for her phone, scrolling through old photos of Isabel. Her sweet smile, her messy pigtails, her gap-toothed grin. Tears slid down Angela's cheeks as she traced her daughter's image with her fingertip. "Wherever you are, baby girl," she whispered, "I hope you're safe." The villa was silent except for the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. As exhaustion finally pulled her under, a single thought flickered through Angela's mind. Maybe this trip wasn't just an escape. Maybe it was the start of something new. A chance to rebuild her strength, to believe again. Morning arrived with the soft glow of sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains. For a few seconds, Angela lay motionless, disoriented by her unfamiliar surroundings. Then, as the memories of the previous day resurfaced, she sat up and looked around the airy room. She slipped out of bed and padded barefoot across the cool tile floor. Entering the living room, she was greeted by a panoramic view of the ocean. The turquoise water shimmered under the rising sun, waves lapping gently at the shoreline just beyond the villa's backyard. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Linda's voice startled her gently. Angela turned to find her friend already dressed, her hair pulled back and a warm smile lighting up her face. "This place is incredible," Angela replied, her voice filled with awe. "I can't believe we're really here." Linda chuckled. Did you sleep okay? Angela gave a nod. Better than I have in years, honestly. And that view. She trailed off, eyes drifting back to the sea. I can't remember the last time I felt this calm. That's the magic of the ocean, Linda said. It resets your soul. Angela smiled softly, letting the peace of the moment sink in. We've got the whole day, Linda added. There's a charming little cafe down the beach. How about we take a walk, grab some breakfast? The thought of walking barefoot along the sand, feeling the sun on her skin, and having breakfast without a ticking clock or worry pressing down on her, it sounded almost surreal. That sounds perfect, Angela said, and for the first time in years she meant it. Angela nodded in quiet agreement, a small smile forming as she echoed, That sounds perfect. She slipped into her sandals and followed Linda through the airy villa toward the back door. As they stepped outside, the soft morning light bathed everything in a warm, golden glow. Angela's breath caught as her feet touched the wooden deck, which overlooked a pristine swimming pool glistening beneath the early sun. Just beyond the pool, a small white gate marked the boundary between the villa's private grounds and the adjacent public beach. Linda pushed the gate open, and together they stepped onto the sand, warm and silky beneath their feet. The transition from luxury to natural beauty was seamless, and yet Angela felt a conflicted tug in her chest. The splendor of her surroundings, the azure waves, the whispering breeze, the sun rising over the horizon, was breathtaking, and still part of her hesitated to enjoy it. A voice deep inside whispered that she didn't deserve peace while her daughter was still missing. But she tried, just as Linda had urged, to stay rooted in the present, to breathe in the moment, to let the sound of the waves wash over her guilt, if only for a little while. They began walking along a narrow path of packed sand bordered by scattered tufts of dune grass. The shoreline curved ahead in a gentle arc, kissed by the ebb and flow of the tide. A few early risers dotted the beach, joggers pacing silently, a couple of dog walkers with leashes slack in hand. Otherwise it was quiet, serene, like a world untouched. Up ahead, Angela noticed a section of the beach cordoned off by decorative rope and posted signs. Something about the setup caught her attention. She shielded her eyes from the morning glare and squinted, trying to discern what was going on. Linda followed her gaze. Huh, she said, curiosity piqued. Looks like some kind of event is being set up. As they continued walking, the details became clearer. Dozens of white chairs were neatly arranged in rows facing a floral arch. Beneath the arch, workers moved briskly, arranging bouquets and straightening fabric. Tables were being placed nearby, hinting at an upcoming reception. A soft buzz of activity filled the air. Angela tilted her head. It's a wedding, she murmured, the realization landing with a surprising pang in her heart. Memories of her own wedding came rushing back. The music, the laughter, the joy that had once seemed endless. The image of her late husband smiling down at her flashed in her mind, followed by the bittersweet ache of how quickly it had all faded. They arrived at a cozy beach cafe nestled atop a weathered wooden deck overlooking the shore. The scent of fresh coffee and buttery pastries greeted them. Staff members in crisp uniforms welcomed them warmly, and Linda, never one to contain her curiosity, turned to a passing waiter with a friendly smile. "Excuse me," she said, "do you know what's going on down the beach?" The young man nodded. "Yes, ma'am. That's a private wedding being hosted at Villa Data. Belongs to a wealthy family. They've rented out the beachfront and closed it off for the day." "Villa Data," Linda repeated thoughtfully. "Sounds fancy." The waiter chuckled. "Oh, it is. The couple spared no expense. It's going to be a very exclusive event." Linda thanked him, then turned back to Angela, her eyes twinkling with intrigue. Can you imagine? Renting out an entire beach for a wedding? Must be someone important. Angela offered a quiet nod, her eyes again drifting toward the distant preparations. Despite herself, she couldn't look away. Something about the scene pulled at her. Nostalgia? Envy? Maybe even a flicker of yearning. She wasn't sure. They placed their orders and moved to a table with a perfect view of the ocean and the ongoing setup. As they sipped their drinks and watched, the beach slowly transformed into a picture-perfect scene of romance. The white arch gleamed under the sun, flower petals were scattered along the aisle, and soft instrumental music began to float on the breeze. Suddenly, a ripple of applause echoed from the gathering. Angela turned, craning her neck to see what was happening. From the grand villa at the far end of the beach, a couple emerged. The guests rose to their feet as the pair began walking slowly toward the arch. "Oh, look," Linda said, nudging Angela excitedly. "It's the bride and groom." Angela turned her full attention to the procession and froze. The couple walking down the aisle did not resemble what she had expected. The bride was a young girl, shockingly young, no older than 10 or 11 by Angela's estimate. Her white dress hung delicately around her small frame, and her face, framed by a floral crown, looked solemn and unsure. Beside her walked an elderly man. His posture was hunched, his steps slow and deliberate. He wore a finely tailored suit, but the deep lines on his face and the way he leaned slightly on a cane betrayed his age. Angela's breath hitched. "Is that the bride?" she asked, disbelief coloring her voice. Linda blinked, her expression shifting from wonder to confusion. I mean, maybe she's a flower girl? Or his granddaughter?" Angela stared harder. There was no one else behind them, no second couple. No one looked surprised. The guests continued smiling, clapping gently. 2009. "I don't see anyone else," she murmured. Linda gave a short, uneasy laugh. "Maybe he's the father of the groom and walking her in place of her real escort." "Maybe," Angela said, though she didn't sound convinced. They watched the scene unfold in silence. The little girl and the old man reached the arch. The officiant stepped forward. Guests settled into their seats, and still no other bride or groom appeared. "Where's the actual couple?" Linda whispered, her voice barely audible now. Angela answered, her voice trembling slightly. What if that's them?" Linda turned sharply. "You mean she's the bride and he's the groom?" Angela's mouth opened, but no words came. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the inexplicable tableau before her. Linda's eyes narrowed as she studied the pair again. "That can't be. That girl is a child." Angela didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the girl's face. There was something about her, something painfully familiar. A chill traced down Angela's spine. Her thoughts tumbled, disjointed and frantic. Could it be? No, it couldn't. But the resemblance was haunting. They remained rooted in place, both women silently trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before them. The girl and the elderly man walked solemnly down the aisle, their steps slow and careful, as if each movement had been rehearsed under immense pressure. The ambient sounds of the beach, waves rolling against the shore, the occasional cry of a distant gull, faded into the background, drowned by the eerie quiet that clung to the ceremony like a fog. Something about it gnawed at Linda. She couldn't pinpoint exactly what, but there was an unmistakable weight to the atmosphere. Her eyes were drawn to the young girl in the white dress. Any other child at a wedding would be beaming with joy, giggling with excitement, or at the very least distracted by all the attention. But this girl was different. She moved like a ghost, her shoulders stiff, her gaze lowered. Her face bore no expression of happiness. Instead, it was distant, somber, as if she were marching toward something she couldn't escape. The guests, too, seemed strangely subdued. There was no excited murmuring, no laughter, no flashes of cell phone cameras capturing joyful memories. The absence of celebration was so stark it felt as though the event were more ritual than romance. Cold, controlled, scripted. Not a soul clapped or cheered. The air felt thick, stifling. Then Linda noticed something else. Security. 2 uniformed guards stood at either end of the event, upright and still, like statues carved from stone. Their eyes swept the area methodically, clearly watching more than just for uninvited guests. Angela followed Linda's gaze and felt a chill settle deep in her spine. "Who are these people?" she whispered. "What kind of family spends this much money on a wedding that feels so lifeless?" As the girl and the elderly man reached the front of the aisle, Linda leaned forward, squinting slightly. "Wait! She's not standing beside him," she said quietly. Angela frowned. She looked again. The girl wasn't at the groom's side. Instead, she had taken a place facing the guests, on the opposite side of the officiant. She stood straight, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. And then, for the briefest of moments, the girl looked up, and her gaze passed in Angela and Linda's direction. Angela's breath caught in her chest. A jolt of electricity surged through her as her eyes locked on the girl's face. The air seemed to vanish from her lungs. Her heart pounded like a war drum. There was something about her, a familiarity that went far beyond chance. Linda noticed the change in Angela's expression. "What is it?" she whispered, alarmed. Angela's voice trembled. She looks like Isabel." Linda blinked. "What?" Angela swallowed hard. Her gaze was locked, unblinking. "That girl? She looks just like my daughter. The same eyes, the shape of her face, her mouth." Linda turned her full attention to the child again. Her face tightened. "Angela, are you sure? It's been 4 years. It might just be a resemblance." Angela shook her head slowly, as though trying to dislodge the weight of doubt. "I don't know. I can't explain it, but the way she moves, the sadness in her eyes, I feel it in my bones." Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. "Angela, please. I know how much you miss her. But grief can trick our minds. It can make us see things we desperately want to believe are real." "But look at her," Angela insisted, her voice cracking. "She's not just similar, she's almost identical to how Isabel would look today." Linda studied her friend, torn between concern and sympathy. Even if she looks like her, why would she be here? In Puerto Rico? In a wedding like this? Angela's jaw clenched. "I don't know, but everything about this is wrong." They turned back toward the scene. The girl remained at the front, unmoving. The elderly man stood across from her, but there was still no sign of another bride or groom. No introduction, no welcome, no ceremony beginning. Linda frowned. If this were a normal wedding, the officiant would have started by now, but they're all just waiting. Why? Angela tried to calm her racing heart. Maybe the bride hasn't come out yet. Maybe she's just part of the ceremony somehow." Linda shook her head slowly, unconvinced. "Or maybe she is the bride." The idea hung between them like a dark cloud. Angela laughed nervously. "No, that can't be. That's not possible. They wouldn't let a child marry an old man in plain sight, would they?" Linda didn't answer. She looked around again. The guards. The silence. The uneasy glances of the few guests. "We shouldn't stay here," she said quietly. "This doesn't feel right. We're strangers watching someone's private event. What if they notice us?" She started to step away, retreating back toward the cafe, but Angela remained rooted. Something deep and primal kept her feet planted in the sand. She had to be sure, had to see the girl's face again. With a quiet determination, she took a few steps forward, moving closer toward the edge of the event area. "Angela," Linda hissed from behind her. "Don't. What are you doing?" "I just need to see her more clearly," she replied under her breath. Before she could take another step, 2 of the security guards moved. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. They simply appeared. Swift, silent, purposeful. Their expressions were cold and unreadable, their stance firm. One of them spoke. "This is private property. You're not permitted here." Angela froze. The calm in the guard's voice only made the threat more chilling. His words weren't a request, they were an order. "I'm sorry," she stammered, stepping back. "I didn't realize." She turned and saw Linda hurrying toward her, anxiety written across her face. "What are you doing?" Linda asked, grabbing her by the arm. "Why did you get so close?" Angela's voice was a whisper now. "I had to be sure." "It's because of the girl, isn't it?" Linda asked gently. Angela nodded, the emotion rising again in her throat. "It sounds insane, I know. But something in me, I can't explain it. I feel like it's her." Linda took Angela's hand in hers and squeezed it tightly. "Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But we can't figure that out today. Let's go. Let's think this through before we act." With one last lingering look at the girl, her face still fixed in Angela's memory, she turned and followed Linda away from the beach. but her mind raced with images and questions, each more disturbing than the last. The girl, the silence, the guards, and the resemblance she couldn't ignore. Something was wrong, and Angela wasn't going to forget it. Despite her reluctance, Angela didn't argue when Linda gently insisted they take their coffees to go. Her voice had been calm, but unmistakably firm, a subtle cue that they needed to create some distance between themselves and the unsettling wedding. Angela complied, understanding that dwelling too long on the scene they had just witnessed would only deepen her unease. They walked in silence through the villa's garden path, winding beneath swaying palms and bursts of vibrant tropical flowers. The tranquil beauty around them stood in stark contrast to the tension gripping Angela's chest. Just as they reached the back patio, soft music drifted toward them on the breeze. It was faint but unmistakable. The wedding had officially begun. Inside the villa, they settled at the dining table for a quiet breakfast. Sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting dappled light across their plates. Cutlery clinked against porcelain, and the hum of the ocean provided a constant, soothing backdrop. Yet for all the serenity around her, Angela barely touched her food. Her thoughts remained ensnared by the image of the girl, the one who looked so hauntingly like Isabel. She absently pushed a piece of mango around her plate, her fork scraping gently against the ceramic. Across the table, Linda observed her silently for a few moments before speaking. "You know," she said, her tone light, "my best friend and I have a little tradition when we come to Puerto Rico. We always book a massage on the first day. It helps us relax, settle in." Angela looked up, trying to mask the turmoil in her eyes. "That sounds nice," she replied. "I think I could use something like that right now." Linda nodded, already dialing the number of their trusted local masseuse. The call was brief, just a few exchanged words in fluent Spanish, and soon the appointment was confirmed. 30 minutes, Linda said with a smile. "You're going to feel like a whole new person afterward." Angela nodded, though her thoughts were still scattered. She turned her attention to her phone, checking for a message from Luca. The sales report from the stall was due, and the distraction felt welcome. When a soft knock came at the front door, Linda jumped up, beaming. "That'll be her." Angela barely looked up. "Actually, Linda, would you mind going first?" Linda paused, her brows rising. "Me? But I made the appointment for you." "I know," Angela said quickly, "but I just remembered. I need to follow up with Luca. He should have sent me the sales figures by now." Linda studied her friend for a moment before nodding. "Okay, but only if you promise you won't disappear on me." "I'll be right here," Angela assured her. Linda exchanged a few words with the masseuse before retreating to her room. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Angela alone in the villa's quiet living room. She sank into the couch, phone in hand, and opened the message from Luca. The numbers were there. Total sales, item breakdown, digital receipts. All of it tidy and efficient. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her attention kept drifting. The wedding music had grown louder. It spilled into the room through the open patio door, riding on the coastal breeze. The melody had changed. It was more upbeat now, threaded with rhythmic percussion and the occasional burst of laughter from the beach. Angela's eyes flicked toward the shore. She saw them again, people dancing, mingling, toasting beneath strings of delicate lights. The festive noise clashed violently with the image still burned into her mind. The girl in the white dress, her solemn expression, her impossible resemblance to Isabel. She glanced at the clock. Linda wouldn't be done for another half hour. Angela stood slowly, heart pounding. She didn't even hesitate this time. Driven by instinct, she slipped on her sandals, walked through the garden, and stepped back out onto the warm sand. The sun was higher now, casting sharp shadows on the ground. Laughter and music filled the air as guests swayed to the rhythm of a tropical beat. The celebration seemed real now, alive, vibrant. But to Angela, it still felt wrong. Too polished, too rehearsed. She moved closer to the gathering, her gaze scanning the crowd. And then she saw her, the girl. She was dancing now, twirling slowly under the guidance of the elderly man. Her white dress billowed like a cloud, and for a moment the sun caught her profile perfectly. Angela's breath caught. It wasn't just a resemblance anymore. It was undeniable. Every feature, the slope of her nose, the curve of her jaw, even the way she tucked her hair behind one ear. It was all Isabel. A storm of confusion and disbelief churned in Angela's chest. "It can't be," she whispered. "But what if it is?" She turned away from the crowd, trying to compose herself. She needed answers. She had to know who this family was, who owned the villa, what connection, if any, they might have to her lost daughter. With new determination, she circled the property and approached the villa from the front. The entrance was grand, its gate flanked by trimmed hedges and ornate stone pillars. Angela rang the bell, fingers trembling slightly. Moments later, a maid appeared. She was composed, her expression polite but unreadable. "Good afternoon," Angela said carefully. "I'm sorry to bother you. I was just wondering, who owns this villa? The one hosting the wedding?" The maid hesitated. "I'm afraid the owners are not available to speak with you," she replied evenly. "Only they may share information about the event." Angela took a step closer. "Could I speak with them later, perhaps? This is very important." The maid shook her head. "They are currently on the beach. The ceremony is private. I cannot interrupt them." Angela's heart pounded. She wasn't ready to give up. "Please," she said, her voice low. "I just need to know who they are." The maid's demeanor shifted slightly, her tone firm. "I'm sorry, that information is not available. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must return to my duties." She turned sharply, but just then, a man appeared behind Angela, walking up from the street. His presence changed everything. The maid's posture softened instantly. "Good morning, Mr. Langworth," she said, her voice lighter now, almost deferential. Angela turned to face him, sensing that he was someone of importance, someone who might hold the answers she so desperately needed. The maid greeted him with a practiced, deferential smile and opened the ornate iron gate without hesitation. The man who approached was tall, his frame commanding, clad in a dark, expertly tailored suit. His features were sharply defined, his presence exuding both confidence and calculation. He paused as his eyes fell on Angela, assessing her with a cool, measured stare. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice, though outwardly cordial, held a guarded edge. Polite but distant, with a current of suspicion running just beneath the surface. Angela hadn't expected to run into anyone of importance, certainly not someone with such obvious authority. Caught off guard, she fumbled for words. I just wanted to congratulate your family on the wedding," she said, forcing a smile that felt brittle and transparent even to her. His expression remained neutral for a beat, and then shifted, ever so slightly. Something flickered behind his eyes. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The faint warmth in his voice vanished. "And you are?" he asked, his tone now noticeably colder. Angela hesitated, unsure whether to lie or speak the truth. In the end, honesty emerged by instinct. "Angela? Angela Harrow." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. The man's expression froze. A veil dropped over his face, the slight curve of his mouth flattening into a line of steel. His demeanor changed so suddenly and so completely that Angela instinctively took half a step back. "I don't have time for this," he said abruptly, his voice now clipped and unwelcoming. "Please leave. We're in the middle of a private family event." Before Angela could respond, he turned on his heel and strode away, disappearing through the gate without another glance. The maid, no longer smiling, stepped forward and closed the gate with a soft but final click. Her face was unreadable. Angela stood in stunned silence, her heart hammering in her chest. The man's reaction, the abrupt shift in his expression when she said her name. It hadn't been mere annoyance. It had been recognition, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. Slowly she turned and walked away, her legs stiff with tension. Each step felt heavier than the last. What had she just uncovered? What had she unknowingly walked into? When she returned to the villa, she saw Linda standing at the back patio, her brows furrowed with worry. She hurried forward as soon as she spotted Angela. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice a mixture of relief and frustration. "I came out of my massage and you were gone. I was worried sick." Angela took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm sorry, Linda. I couldn't shake the feeling. I went back to the beach. I had to see the girl again." Linda's expression softened, though a trace of exasperation lingered. "Angela, I get it, I really do. But this obsession, this desperation, it's not good for you, it's not healthy." They moved inside, and Angela sank into the sofa, suddenly aware of how drained she felt. Her shoulders slumped as if the weight of her emotions had finally become too much to bear. Linda sat beside her, laying a gentle hand on her arm. "Tell me what happened," she said, softly. Angela recounted everything, the way the man's demeanor changed the moment she said her name, the cold dismissal, the haunted look in his eyes. Linda listened intently, her concern deepening with every word. "I know it might sound crazy," Angela said, her voice trembling, "but I'm telling you, he knew who I was. He recognized my name. And the girl, she was dancing with that old man. Her grandfather, I think. She looked so much like Isabel." Linda sighed, torn between skepticism and the instinct to protect her friend. "Angela, I want to believe you, but we can't jump to conclusions. You might have startled him. Maybe he thought you were a reporter or a trespasser." Angela shook her head firmly. "No, it was more than that. You didn't see his face. It was like he'd seen a ghost." Linda exhaled slowly. "All right, let's think this through logically. We need facts before we start throwing around accusations. Do we know anything about this family?" Angela nodded. "His name was Langworth. That's what the maid called him." Linda rose and disappeared into her room, returning moments later with her laptop. "Let's look him up." For the next hour they combed through pages of search results, piecing together everything they could find about the Langworth family. Articles, business profiles, real estate listings. It was all there. William Langworth, they learned, was a prominent hotel magnate. He owned luxury properties across the country, and several abroad, including multiple estates in Puerto Rico. His family was known for their philanthropy and high society appearances. The man Angela had spoken to was his son, Charles Langworth, a name associated with the business as well. They scanned through family photos and public event coverage, looking for any signs of the girl Angela had seen. But there were none. No mention of a child, no record of a granddaughter. "It doesn't make sense," Angela muttered, rubbing her temples. "They look like a typical elite family, but something isn't right." Linda leaned back in her chair. "Maybe Charles was just in a hurry. Maybe he thought you were invading their privacy." Angela didn't respond. Her thoughts were already spiraling again. She pulled out her phone and tapped open a folder labeled Isabel. She scrolled past dozens of pictures. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, first days of school, until she found what she was looking for. A digital age progression image the police had created a few months ago. It showed Isabel as she might appear today, at 10 years old. She held it up. "Look at this," she whispered. Linda leaned in, her breath caught in her throat. The resemblance between the photo and the girl from the beach was almost unbearable. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Angela, she looks just like her." Angela's voice was barely audible. "I knew it. I knew I wasn't imagining things." Linda was silent for a moment, then sat forward with sudden resolve. "Let me do some digging. There has to be something out there. Records, mentions, even gossip. If that girl really is your daughter, we'll find a thread to pull." Linda's fingers flew across the keyboard as she typed Langworth granddaughter into the search bar, her eyes scanning the screen with sharp focus. Angela stood behind her, arms crossed tightly, the tension in her body almost tangible. The web page refreshed, a few irrelevant results loaded, and then nothing. No photographs, no articles, no birth records, no public mentions of a granddaughter connected to the powerful Langworth family. Just silence, digital silence. Angela's stomach twisted with frustration. "How can someone like her not exist online?" she said, her voice low but taut. "If that girl really is William Langworth's granddaughter, she should have been featured somewhere. Photos, events, press mentions. Something." Linda leaned back in her chair, concern furrowing her brow. "There's nothing. It's like she doesn't exist." Angela took a step back, the storm of emotions swelling inside her, hope mingling with fear, edged with a flash of anger. "We can't just sit here," she said, her voice rising with urgency. "We saw her. We both saw her. If there's even a chance she's Isabel, we need to do something." Linda nodded slowly, her earlier skepticism steadily unraveling under the weight of what they'd seen. "You're right, but we have to be careful. We can't barge into this head first. These people are rich, powerful, well-connected. If they're hiding something, they'll bury us under lawyers before we even get close to the truth." Angela started pacing, her mind racing. "We need more information. We need a plan." For the next hour, the two women scoured the internet, digging through any public record that might link the Langworth family to Miami, or specifically to the mall where Isabel disappeared. They pulled up travel logs, charity events, real estate transactions, anything that might place a Langworth in Florida around that time. But no matter how deep they dug, they found nothing, no connection, no hint. "It's like trying to connect a ghost to a footprint," Angela said bitterly. She shoved her coffee aside, untouched and lukewarm. "I need some air." Linda stood, her concern returning. "I'll come with you." They stepped outside into the blaze of the midday sun. The beach, once vibrant and filled with celebration, now stretched before them in stark contrast to the joyful chaos they'd seen just hours earlier. They hadn't intended to return to the wedding area, but a glance toward the villa stopped them in their tracks. The event had vanished. Where once there were flower arches and elegant white chairs, now there were only imprints in the sand and scattered petals caught in the wind. Staff in plain uniforms moved briskly, folding up tables, breaking down canopies, and carting decorations away. The entire wedding site was being dismantled. Linda's brow furrowed. "That's odd," she said. "They're not even waiting until the evening? Most weddings go on until nightfall, at least for the reception." Angela squinted toward the villa, a strange chill creeping down her spine. "Do you think he called it off? After I told him my name?" Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'd say it's a stretch, but honestly, nothing about this feels normal." They moved cautiously toward the beach's private section. The guards who had been stationed earlier were nowhere to be seen, replaced now by indifferent service workers finishing the teardown. No one paid them any mind, so Angela and Linda edged closer. The silence was uncanny. The ocean still lapped against the shore, and the gulls still circled overhead. But the atmosphere had changed. Heavier, more deliberate. Angela's eyes lifted toward the villa's expansive windows, searching for something, anything. Then she froze. "There," she whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. "In the window." Linda followed her gaze and gasped. There, standing just behind the glass, was the girl. The same aquamarine eyes, the same heart-shaped face. Even from a distance, even through the glass, the resemblance to Isabel was breathtaking and horrifying. Angela's heart pounded in her chest. "That's her," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Linda, that's Isabel." The girl turned as if sensing she was being watched. For a moment she seemed to make eye contact, and in her eyes Angela didn't see fear. She saw confusion, curiosity, and perhaps something else, recognition. Then an elderly man approached the girl, reaching out to touch her shoulder. The girl recoiled sharply, stepping back with visible discomfort. She didn't say anything, but her body language screamed. Linda's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" Before they could process what they were witnessing, a loud voice called out behind them. "You again!" They spun around. One of the security guards had returned, his posture rigid, his voice hard. "I told you, this is private property. You need to leave." Angela opened her mouth to respond, but the man had already reached for his radio, speaking into it in clipped, urgent tones. "They're calling for backup," she murmured, her chest tightening with dread. Moments later, two more guards appeared, striding across the sand with practiced precision. Behind them walked the same elderly man who had appeared at the wedding and tried to embrace the girl, William Langworth himself. His presence seemed to shift the air around him, commanding and cold. He stopped a few feet away, regarding them with a stern, unreadable expression. One of the guards leaned in, whispered something, and pointed at Angela. Langworth's gaze shifted to him and held. Then he spoke. "My staff tells me you've been persistent." His voice was low, his tone dry, as if the mere act of addressing her was an inconvenience. Angela stood her ground. "I need to know who that girl is," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Langworth's face remained composed, but something flickered in his eyes. He didn't ask which girl. He didn't feign ignorance. He simply stared. "You came to my home. You've disrupted my family's private celebration, and now you continue to trespass." Angela took a breath. "She looks like my daughter who disappeared 4 years ago." Langworth's jaw tensed. "You're mistaken." "I don't think I am." Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Langworth turned to one of the guards. "Take him inside." His voice sliced through the humid air with the precision of a blade. "I've had multiple reports of your presence since early this morning," William Langworth said, each word dripping with irritation and condescension. "So, I'll ask you plainly, what exactly are you doing here?" Angela's jaw tightened. She stood her ground, unwavering under the weight of his disdain. "If you've received those reports, then you already know who I am," she replied, her voice steady, eyes locked onto his. "I met your son." William's lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, I know who you are," he said with venomous emphasis. "Angela Harrow. The childless widow was running a pathetic salad bar kiosk in South Key Mall." How quaint. Angela's hands curled into fists at her sides, but she refused to react to the bait. Her voice, though quiet, was razor-sharp. "The only reason I'm childless is because you stole my daughter from me 4 years ago." At that, William let out a low, humorless chuckle, the sound void of any amusement. "Stole your daughter?" he echoed mockingly. "And what proof do you have of such a ludicrous accusation?" He took a step closer, the weight of his presence bearing down on her. "You walk onto my property, insult my family, and now you spew baseless claims? On what grounds?" Angela didn't flinch. "I saw her," she said firmly. "Your so-called granddaughter, the girl you claim as family. She has the same blue eyes, the same delicate features, the same expression as my Isabel." For the briefest moment, a flicker of unease passed over William's face, vanishing just as quickly. His mask of arrogance snapped back into place. Without responding, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew his wallet. Angela's breath caught. With practiced slowness, he pulled out a checkbook, the faint scratch of the pen audible as he scribbled something onto the slip of paper. Then, with a smug grin curling at his lips, he handed the check to Angela. "Here," he said, his voice deceptively smooth. "Take it. $500,000. A generous sum to rebuild your life. Invest it, buy a house, expand your salad bar, whatever pathetic little dream you have. Live it." Angela stared at the check. $500,000, 0 cents. The ink was still drying. It felt surreal, offensive, a grotesque insult disguised as a gift. Her hands began to shake, rage flooding her limbs. "How dare you?" she breathed, her voice cracking beneath the weight of fury. "How could you do this? What has my child ever done to deserve being taken from her home, from her mother? And what kind of monster tries to pay off a grieving parent?" William's eyes narrowed, his smile stretching unnervingly. "Monster," he said, chuckling again. "You should think twice before calling her innocent." Angela's breath stalled. "She was too beautiful for her own good," he continued, his voice darkening. "Not a child anymore. She's my wife now. I've done nothing wrong." He winked. Angela's world spun. The ground felt like it had vanished beneath her feet. "You?" she gasped, voice barely audible. "You married her?" A grin crept over his face. "In my country, I've done nothing illegal. She's mine now, and she will remain mine." Angela's entire body shook as the implication sank in, each word a dagger, each smirk a nail in her soul. Her vision blurred with hot tears. She lunged forward, driven by desperation, by the need to claw back justice. But before she could get near him, two security guards seized her from either side, their grips like iron shackles. She thrashed against them, sobbing, screaming, her voice cracking beneath the sheer weight of her anguish. "You're sick! You're evil! Give me back my daughter!" The guards shoved her back, holding her firmly in place. She continued to fight, but their hold was relentless. Linda watched in horror, her own fury boiling over. She fumbled with her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed 911, her voice rising into the receiver. "We need the police here now, please. A girl is being held, abused. This is an emergency." William only laughed, a cold, hollow laugh devoid of all humanity. "You really think the police can help you?" he said, turning his back with a theatrical wave of dismissal. "You're a flea in the shadow of a lion. No one's coming to save you." He disappeared through the villa's gate, flanked by his guards. Angela collapsed to her knees in the sand, sobbing, her chest heaving with sorrow and helplessness. Linda rushed to her, crouching down and wrapping her arms around her friend. Angela's tears soaked her shoulder. There were no words, nothing that could ease the raw, unrelenting pain of what Angela had just been told. The truth had shattered her. The girl she had seen, her Isabel, was not only alive but imprisoned in a nightmare Angela could hardly comprehend. She had utterly forgotten. Minutes passed in silence until the faint sound of sirens broke through the heavy air, a sharp, rising wail that grew closer with every breath. Angela looked up, her eyes swollen, face streaked with tears. The sound filled her with something fragile but undeniable: hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would finally listen. Linda gave her hand a squeeze. "Come on," she whispered. "We have to go to them. We have to tell them everything." Angela nodded, rising shakily to her feet. Each step through the sand was a battle. Her legs wobbled, her body drained, but she moved forward. Together, they made their way from the beach to the front of the villa where two police cars were parked, their lights flashing, their doors ajar. It wasn't over yet. Angela wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and prepared to speak the truth. No matter what came next, he would fight for her daughter. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the otherwise bright Puerto Rican afternoon in a surreal glow. Two uniformed officers approached the front gate of the Langworth estate, their faces unreadable, their steps steady and deliberate. Just behind them, another officer exited the second patrol car, raising a hand to halt Angela and Linda before they could get too close. "Stay back," he instructed firmly, his voice tinged with authority. Angela, heart pounding, peered past him toward the villa. Her eyes locked on William Langworth, flanked by his two stoic bodyguards. He was engaged in what looked like a heated exchange with the officers at the gate. They gestured, argued, voices raised, just loud enough to hint at urgency. And then, as abruptly as it began, William and both officers slipped beyond the gate and disappeared into the grand villa. The quiet that followed was deafening. Linda leaned closer, her brow drawn tight. "What's happening?" she whispered, uncertainty creeping into her voice. The officer beside them remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes scanning the estate. That silence, that refusal to speak, said everything Angela feared. Her stomach churned with dread. Was William trying to manipulate the officers? Was he using his money, his influence, to twist the situation in his favor? She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the check still folded inside. It burned like a brand against her skin, a physical reminder of the corruption she was now fighting against. Angela turned toward the officer, her desperation spilling into her voice. "Please," she said, trembling. "My daughter's been missing for 4 years. I believe she's inside that house. That man, he took her." She pulled out her phone, her hand shaking, and showed him the missing person flyer with Isabel's face. "This is her. Please, you have to believe me." Then she unfolded the check and held it out. "He offered me this. $500,000, just to make me go away. Does that seem like something an innocent man would do?" The officer studied the flyer. His face softened, though his shock at the check's amount was evident. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his radio and spoke into it, requesting an update from the officers already inside. When no response came, he hesitated only briefly before contacting the local station, requesting immediate backup. Angela's breath caught. That moment of inaction had broken. At last, someone was listening. Someone was taking her seriously. More police units arrived within minutes. The officers moved with urgency, coordinating quietly among themselves. But inside the house, there was still no sign of the first two officers. The silence had stretched far too long. Anxiety prickled Angela's skin like needles. "This is taking too long," muttered one officer, stepping forward. "We need to check on them." He motioned for two of his colleagues to join him, while another officer remained with Angela and Linda. The three approached the villa cautiously, calling out, knocking. No response. Then, without warning, one of the officers raised his foot and kicked the door with a resounding crack. The wood splintered, the door swinging open into darkness. Angela's breath hitched. She gripped Linda's hand tightly as the officer standing with them began to shift on his feet, glancing back and forth from the villa to the street, as though sensing the rising tension in the air. And then, figures appeared. One by one, members of the Langworth family emerged, escorted by officers. The maid, the bodyguards, the son. Their faces, pale and tense, were not those of people in control. These were people caught off guard, stripped of their usual poise. Though they weren't in handcuffs, the fear in their eyes spoke volumes. Angela and Linda stood frozen as the family passed them. Some cast sharp glances of contempt, but others showed something else. Regret, even sorrow. The officers guided them into waiting police cars, the doors slamming shut with mechanical finality. Within seconds, the vehicles pulled away, disappearing down the long drive. Angela turned her gaze back toward the villa, her breath catching in her throat as a final figure was led out. William Langworth, in handcuffs. His hands were bound tightly at the wrists, the glint of metal catching the afternoon sun. Angela's heart pounded as she watched him. This man who had tormented her, stolen her daughter, and violated everything sacred in her life, finally being forced to face justice. But as he was led past her, he turned. That same sneer twisted across his face. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "I'll sue you for defamation, for false accusations, for stealing my wife." Angela stood her ground, refusing to look away. He leaned slightly closer, his voice turning into a serpent's whisper. "Or, you can cooperate. Be smart. My lawyer will call you. Let's make this easy. You play nice, I'll play nice." The wink that followed made her stomach churn, the same gesture he'd used when handing her the check. Before she could react, the officer beside him shoved him roughly into the back seat of the patrol car. The door slammed shut. The vehicle started down the drive, carrying William Langworth away toward the police station, toward the reckoning he so richly deserved. Angela was still trying to process the moment when Linda let out a gasp. "Angela, look," she said, pointing toward a smaller figure stepping from the shadows of the villa. Angela turned, her heart stopping. There, walking beside a female officer, was a young girl. Thin, quiet, tentative, but unmistakable. Her daughter, Isabel? Angela's breath caught in her throat as their eyes met. There was no mistaking it. Those eyes, that face, it was her little girl, her Isabel. The girl blinked, confusion and recognition washing over her all at once. Her lips parted. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling, "is that really you? Are you here to take me home?" Angela stumbled forward, overcome by emotion. The world blurred around her. All that mattered now was the fragile voice that had reached across years of darkness and despair. Tears streaming down her face, she whispered back, "Yes, baby, I'm here. I'm taking you home." As tears welled in her eyes, Angela's entire body trembled. The sight before her was one she had imagined 1,000 times, dreamed of, cried for, prayed over, and yet nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming wave of emotion now crashing over her. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she took a small, cautious step forward, her gaze locked with the wide, familiar blue eyes of the little girl who stood several feet away, barely able to believe what she was seeing. Isabel, her daughter, alive, right there standing in the shadow of the police car, wearing a dress far too mature for a child her age, her face streaked with confusion and silent questions. The moment their eyes met, the noise of the world fell away. Everything, the officers, the villa, the tension, vanished into a blur, as the two locked into the only thing that mattered: each other. The police officer, recognizing what was happening, quietly stepped aside without a word. It wasn't protocol, but he knew instinctively this was a moment he couldn't interrupt. No procedure, no official line of duty could justify standing between a mother and the daughter she had lost. And then Isabel moved. With hesitant steps that quickly turned into a sprint, the child flung herself forward and into her mother's arms, clinging tightly, sobbing uncontrollably into Angela's chest. "Mom," she cried, her voice cracking from a place of deep pain and relief, "please, please take me home." Angela collapsed to her knees in the sand, wrapping her arms around her daughter with desperate strength, her own sobs breaking free after years of being locked in her chest. "I'm here, baby," she whispered into Isabel's tangled hair. I've got you now, and I'll never let you go again. I promise I won't bother you when you shop again." Isabel sniffled through her tears, the words stabbing Angela's heart with guilt. "I'll be good, I promise." Angela pulled back just enough to cup her daughter's face, gazing into those tear-streaked eyes she had memorized long ago. "No, sweetheart," she choked, brushing her thumb gently across Isabel's cheek. "You were never bad. You were perfect. You didn't do anything wrong. It was me. I should have never left you. They were the bad ones, not you." Isabel blinked, confused but comforted, placing her small hands on her mother's face. "Mom, don't cry like that," she said gently, wiping away her mother's tears with her fingers. "It's okay now. You found me." Angela pulled her daughter close again, holding her as tightly as she dared, afraid to even blink, as though her daughter might vanish again. She breathed in the scent of her child's hair, her skin, absorbing every detail, every proof that this was real. Behind them, Linda stood quietly, overcome with emotion. Her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She didn't dare interrupt. She didn't need to. This wasn't her moment. It was Angela's, and after all these years of agony, she had her child back. Minutes passed before Angela was finally able to stand, her legs weak beneath her, still holding Isabel in her arms. The child clung to her mother's neck, her arms tight, as though afraid someone might try to separate them again. Angela gently tucked a strand of her daughter's hair behind her ear, her voice low. "Sweetheart, we need to go to the police station now. They need to ask us some questions, but I promise, wherever we go next, we go together." Isabel nodded, still unsure but comforted by her mother's calm presence. Her small fingers remained curled around Angela's shirt as they turned toward the waiting police vehicle. From behind, a woman approached. Kind eyes, steady posture, a quiet confidence that radiated from her even in chaos. She introduced herself as Elizabeth Milton, a social worker sent to ensure Isabel's safety and to help navigate the legal process that would follow. "We'll go slowly," Elizabeth said gently, addressing both of them. "There are some procedures we'll need to follow, but I promise you, I'm here to help, to protect you both." Angela nodded, clutching Isabel's hand as Linda joined them, offering a supportive smile. Together the four of them walked toward the police vehicle. Officers had already cleared the back seat, and one opened the door with a respectful nod. Angela helped Isabel climb in first before sliding in beside her, never loosening her hold. The door shut softly behind them. As the vehicle pulled away from the villa, Angela glanced out the window one last time. The imposing home, once a symbol of wealth and untouchable power, now felt like a tomb, a place that had nearly buried the truth, and her daughter, forever. She held Isabel tighter, letting the past fall behind them as the car moved forward. At the station, the cool artificial light was a jarring contrast to the warmth of their reunion. Angela felt a tightness return to her chest as the officers led them inside. The reality of what lay ahead was setting in: interviews, reports, medical checks, and likely a legal battle unlike anything she'd ever imagined. But Angela was no longer alone. The officers, now much more solemn and alert, briefed her gently. They needed to conduct interviews to begin the formal investigation. Angela nodded, though her grip on Isabel's hand never loosened. When an officer suggested separating them briefly, Isabel instantly recoiled. "No," she cried, her voice shaking. "Don't leave me again." Angela knelt down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "You don't have to go anywhere without me," she said firmly. "We're staying together, always." The officers exchanged a look and nodded. "We can do the interview with both of you in the same room," one of them said. "And Ms. Milton will be present the whole time." Linda was escorted to a different room for her own statement, while Angela and Isabel sat together with the social worker in a small office with soft lighting. Angela wrapped an arm around her daughter as they prepared to speak. The officer in charge, a tall man with a calm voice and a notepad in hand, began asking questions gently. "Before we go too deep," he said, "we'll need to perform a DNA test. It's standard procedure, especially in a case like this. It'll help confirm identity and give us solid evidence in court." Angela nodded. She had nothing to hide. Every fiber of her being knew this was her daughter, and she would do anything to protect her now. "Whatever you need," she said softly. She looked down at Isabel, who sat quietly beside her, her small fingers still entwined with her mother's. "We're going to be okay," Angela whispered. "You're safe now. I'm never letting anyone hurt you again." The officer's expression turned grim as he spoke, his voice steady despite the heavy weight of the information he was about to reveal. "The Langsworth family will likely get their lawyers involved soon," he said, the implication as heavy as the silence that followed. Angela nodded slowly, struggling to fully grasp the magnitude of what lay ahead. She wasn't naive. She had always known that bringing down a family like the Langsworths with their money, power, and influence would not be easy. Still, hearing it spoken aloud by an officer of the law made everything feel more real. Her pursuit of justice was no longer a solitary, hopeless fight. It had begun. "Have they said anything yet?" Angela asked, her voice tight with tension. "Has anyone in that family spoken?" The officer shook his head, his mouth set in a firm line. "No. They've all invoked their right to remain silent. Every last one of them has refused to answer a single question. Their lawyers have been contacted and are en route." Angela felt her heart sink. But before despair could take hold, the officer continued. "However, there have been some developments," he said, his tone shifting. "Some individuals have come forward. One of Mr. Langsworth's personal bodyguards, Raul Santiago, has confessed." Angela's breath caught. "Confessed?" she echoed, her grip tightening around Isabel's small hand. "Yes," the officer confirmed, nodding slowly. "Raul admitted to abducting your daughter the day she vanished. He confessed to stalking the South Key Mall for weeks before the incident, studying the daycare routines, and even bribing some staff to turn a blind eye. He took surveillance photos and sent them directly to William Langsworth, who would then select a child." Angela's stomach turned violently. The world around her tilted as waves of revulsion washed over her. Her voice trembled. "And Isabel, she was one of those he chose?" The officer looked pained, but nodded. "Raul said he was paid handsomely for the kidnapping. But he also said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. When we brought him in for questioning, he confessed everything." Angela felt a wave of nausea. "Did he say how it happened?" The officer's jaw clenched. "Yes, Raul created a diversion by setting off the fire alarm inside the mall. Amid the confusion, he approached your daughter in the restroom, sedated her with a substance we're still identifying, and carried her out in a staff uniform. He had forged transport documents prepared, and within an hour they were on a private flight to Puerto Rico." Angela squeezed her daughter's hand as she listened, every detail piercing her like shards of glass. Isabel sat quietly beside her, her eyes distant, trying to piece together the fragments of memories she had been too young to understand. "But that's not all," the officer continued grimly. "We also interviewed one of the maids from the Langsworth estate. She revealed a disturbing pattern. William Langsworth has been orchestrating similar abductions for decades. 5 so-called marriages in total, each involving a child under the age of 12. None were legal, of course, and each occurred in a different country to avoid detection. Angela's hand flew to her mouth, horror clawing at her throat. "Oh my God!" The maid admitted that she herself had been trafficked into the Langsworth household as a child, the officer added. She was bought by William's father, raised to serve the family without question. She's been part of their inner circle for nearly 30 years. Her loyalty was conditioned into her, and it's only recently that she began to question everything. Angela's head spun. The enormity of the corruption, the cruelty, it was staggering. "They all knew," she whispered. "The entire family. They all knew what he was doing." The officer's expression hardened. "That's our belief. The Langsworth family has remained loyal to William not out of love, but because he controls everything, the estate, the wealth, the business empire. He is the linchpin of their empire, and without him it all collapses." Angela's blood boiled. How could anyone stand by and allow such evil to persist simply to protect their own financial interests? Just then a pair of technicians entered the room carrying a small case. One of them addressed the officer briefly before turning to Angela. "We're here to take DNA samples," the woman said gently. "This will help confirm your daughter's identity in court and will be crucial in building your case." Angela nodded, her emotions still raw, but she cooperated. As the technician gently swabbed the inside of her cheek, Angela looked over at Isabel, who was watching with wide, uncertain eyes. When it was her turn, Angela held her daughter's hand tightly, murmuring reassurances as the cotton swab brushed softly against her mouth. A quiet fell over the room once the technicians left, broken only by the soft hum of the overhead lights. Angela exhaled deeply, the weight of the last hour sinking into her bones. The journey ahead would be long. There would be hearings, investigations, media attention, and likely endless legal battles. But now, finally, she wasn't trapped in the dark. She had the truth, she had witnesses, and she had Isabel. Her mind drifted back to the day her daughter disappeared, the way the world seemed to shatter around her, the sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling praying for a miracle, the endless flyers, the unanswered calls, the cruel silence from the authorities. She had been dismissed, ignored, even pitied, but she had never given up. And now she held her daughter again. Isabel leaned her head against Angela's shoulder, her small fingers still wrapped tightly in her mother's. Angela kissed the top of her daughter's head and closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about healing, about building a future where Isabel would never have to live in fear again, about making sure no other child suffered the same fate. The Langsworth family had lived above the law for too long. They had used their fortune to hide their atrocities, to silence the truth, to inflict harm with impunity. But their empire, no matter how gilded, had begun to crack. The world was finally seeing them for who they truly were. Angela opened her eyes, her resolve steel-like in her chest. Nayli thought they were untouchable, she whispered to herself. But they weren't. They had underestimated the power of a mother's love, and now they would face the full force of that love turned to fury.